When we put a lot of animals together, what do we have? A lot of manure. That's a problem. The second law of thermodynamics says that's waiting to disperse. And so it's a problem waiting to happen. And of course it does happen. We know that in Iowa there have been hundreds of manure spills from misapplications, for example, here, a sprayer of manure, spills, leaks running into the rivers. There have been millions of fish killed, actually, in the past 10 years. And what about the animals inside? They are also in a monoculture system, very crowded together, totally unlike nature's diversity tendencies. And to maintain this monoculture takes a lot of energy. It takes antibiotics. And we know that hogs in these situations are fed generally subtherapeutic levels of antibiotics. And this has been linked to antibiotic resistance in humans because subtherapeutic doses selects for those organisms that resist that antibiotic, will select for resistance. In the University of Illinois, a study came out recently. They found 7 antibiotic-resistant bacteria or genes in a lagoon, and these red marks are wells in the groundwater. They trace the same genes, and as they got far enough away, the genes disappeared. So the closer to the lagoon, the more concentrated these antibiotic-resistant genes were. And it's been known now from studies from the 70s and also the 90s that people working in the hog buildings suffer from chronic problems like asthma, bronchitis. However, it was in the 90s where we began to notice that this actually is the same thing for neighbors. Neighbors have the same kind of symptoms as the CAFO workers. In '98, the Centers for Disease Control convened a workshop of professionals, and they concluded that adequate evidence currently exists to indicate airborne emissions from large-scale swine facilities constitute a public health problem. So a lot of studies are showing this. More recently, studies in Iowa show that children near hog CAFOs have a much higher rate of asthma going to school near, or if they live on a hog farm, they have a much higher rate of asthma. And if that hog farm is fed subtherapeutic antibiotics, it's much higher still. And it's not just hogs, of course, that are in these kind of confinement situations. Dairy operations, many cows in one place. And we have some of the same kind of problems with that sort of system. Now there is a trend in the upper Midwest of dairy farms grazing. And actually in Wisconsin, about 25% of the dairy farms are grazing dairy farms. And this is really kind of based upon the ecology. Again, you have a diverse polyculture of perennial plants, and the animals coming through and grazing it off and going to the next place, almost like the buffalo and prairie relationship. And so this is using the power of ecology to make it all happen. And so you can see here in the foreground, this paddock was grazed, and the next paddock is ready to go. This is my farm. Compare that to a confined system where the forage has to be harvested, hauled to the silos, blown up in the silos, stored, blown back to the cows, and then the manure has to be scraped up and hauled back to the field. Well, in a grazing system, you open the gate, cows go in, they graze all day, they spread the manure, and they bring the milk home at night. And they enjoy the job. It's a much healthier situation. Dairy cows on average last about 2.5 years, and grazing farms, they last much longer. This is my farm when I took it over 12 years ago. It was the corn and soybeans. It was very beat up. This was one of my grass waterways. And in some places, the topsoil was totally gone. So I planted it in a diversity of grasses and legumes, and it's been building it back very quickly. And this is one thing, wildlife is coming back very strongly on that farm. What happens in a pasture situation when manure is dropped on the ground? Well, the topsoil is aerobic. In there, every teaspoonful has more microorganisms than all the people on the face of the earth in a fertile soil. So right away, they start to decompose that manure. Here you kick over a dried up cow pie, and I can count 30, 40 earthworms under one cow pie. And that's the process of nature degrading that manure. What happens with manure in a lagoon? Well, there's not oxygen there. It's anaerobic. And so it begins to putrefy. So this totally transforms that manure. It's as much different from the manure as the manure is from the feed the cows ate. It totally transformed it. There are hundreds of volatile organic carbons in there, that organic compounds, that most of them toxic, and the cocktail together, we don't even know what it does all. Now hogs can be raised in different ways. They can be raised in more ecologically sound ways. Hoop houses, for example, where they're in deep bedded situations, and the manure that is absorbed by the bedding, and it can be composted and turns into an odorless material that's a great soil amendment. So are CAFOs more efficient? Well, studies at ISU and other places show that actually on a per pig basis, the profitability is about the same for raising hoop houses or CAFOs or outdoors. It's pretty comparable. Farrowing hogs in hoop houses is also found to be as profitable as in confinements. Economic development. Studies have shown that when hogs are raised in a huge CAFO, that it only provides a small number of jobs compared to if they're raised by smaller family farms. And also that smaller family farms spend much more of their money locally.